Welcome to Inside Sponsorship, the show that provides sponsorship professionals with advice, insights and news so they can maximise their commercial programs and achieve best practice.
Content is king. It's almost a worn-out saying these days, but since it was first coined, it has grown into an absolute truth. Whether you are trying to attract customers or retain customers, it's become an integral part of a lot of businesses around the world, and boy, have some businesses really embraced it. Take Red Bull, for example. It could be argued that they're just as much a production company as they are a beverage company. And even if that isn't strictly true, there is no doubt the content, which is mostly event-based, is all designed to attract and engage consumers and then convert them into paying customers. However, for the majority of rights holders, it's been a very slow process to get on board with content, and even those doing it well now lag behind the general marketing community. For what reason, I don't know. It might be the strong TV deals where the money is guaranteed over long periods. It might be a lack of in-house skills on top of tight budgets, or it just might be simply no executive vision and buy-in. Or it might be a combination of all those things, or maybe even something else. Social media and other digital channels clearly, as we all know, offer the opportunity to reach audiences more easily and quite often more cheaply, even if they are geographically dispersed. And looking at the landscape now, and in my 60-second Google research, there are, excluding dating sites, 210 social media sites. But even what is social media and what is broadcast media is very blurred. Is YouTube a social media platform, or is it a broadcaster? Does it even matter? Surely the most important thing is creating the right content for a well-defined target audience and getting it to them through channels that they want to consume it through when they want to consume it. If you achieve that, then you will have great success, and that in turn becomes very attractive to sponsors. Or, if you're a brand, knowing that a rights holder can deliver content well to an engaged audience provides an opportunity with a partner who truly gets it. Now, there's no doubting that there is a trend here with content and rights holders, and that's why Nielsen's Commercial Trends in Sports 2017 report lists trend number 2 as IP owners taking control of content and the conversation. Now, that is very much an easier said than done scenario, but never fear. On the show is Max Barnett, Global Head of Digital at Nielsen Sports, who joins us to discuss this trend in detail. Welcome to episode 41 of Inside Sponsorship. I'm your host, Daniel Oyston, and 41, it's kind of exciting to have episode number 50 in our sights. A shout out to Sean Brown, General Manager Commercial at Brisbane Roar in the A-League. Sean shot me a message on LinkedIn to say that he's loving the podcast and he's found it a wealth of knowledge. So thanks, Sean. That's very much appreciated. Glad you're enjoying the podcast, and good luck to the Brisbane Roar in the upcoming season. The rest of you, why not be cool like Sean and send me a message and I'll give you a shout out as well. You know where to find us. Now, before we hear from Max, also joining us on the podcast, as usual, is our MD, Mark Thompson, who, whenever we welcome a Nielsen staff member on the show to discuss one of their commercial trends, will also blog about the topic through the lens of what that trend means for the sponsorship industry, specifically day-to-day at your desk as you're running around and doing your job. And then he'll come on the show to discuss it. And the blog title this time around is that IP owners controlling content and conversation will change sponsorship. Here's Mark to discuss exactly how and what you can do about it. Mark Thompson, welcome to the show.
Hi Daniel, how are you doing?
Good. I don't have any jokes travel, or I've got nothing good to start this conversation with. What have you prepped?
It has actually been a unusually normal period of time for us, hasn't it? Like actually in the one spot for a while, and
getting restless.
Not surprisingly, it's been very productive. But
it's funny how much work you get done when you're actually at work.
I was going to say it's funny how much work you get done when you actually work. Yeah.
Have you got any trips planned?
I'm heading back over to the UK on the 25th of September, so just about 5 or 6 weeks. For 3 weeks, we've got a couple of conferences.
Leaders? Is Leaders on there?
Yeah, Leaders Week is on. It's a big week this time. It's a big...
Tux? Do you have to take your tux? Did you have to wear a tux to some event last time?
Yeah, no, that was the Leaders Under 40 Awards. I've gone backwards
You're past 40 now, so you're not eligible?
I'm nowhere near 40, but I am near it, but I'm not 40. But I've actually obviously gone backwards on the hierarchy of success list because I'm not on the invite list this year.
You could look at it that you've inspired a completely new raft of people who have overtaken your success. How about that?
Do you know how I'm looking at it?
No.
I don't need to take a tux, so that's a bonus on the packing.
Yeah.
But I'm going to have one less hangover.
Oh, I'm sure you'll find something to do on that night. But let's focus on the now. We're continuing our, you might call it a semi-series because we do it every once a month, but we do podcasts in between, obviously, and blogs in between. But continuing our conversation around Nielsen's commercial trends in sport 2017. And this trend is trend number 2, and it's IP owners taking control of content and the conversation. That's not really a secret. It's obvious that's happening and it's a clear trend.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about the reasons and what that means for sponsorship.
What I'm finding about these Nielsen pieces that they've done, they're quite brief, but they're really well thought around in terms of thought-provoking materials. So to write a blog on that, I have to get myself deeper into the actual methodology behind it and the train of thought behind this topic, and it really is quite eye-opening when you actually drill down a little bit into what's happening subtly in the marketplace compared to sort of overtly. So it's the series, I feel, is going to get more interesting as we go through.
But you always ask what this means for sponsorship, don't you?
Always.
It's good of you.
Well,
it helps with the podcast content.
That's right. It's like I'm a selfish sponsorship person. It's all I think about when I read stuff. Yeah.
So, because there's been some recent acquisitions of sports such as UFC and Formula One, and that tells us a lot about the ability of sports to actually own the content and the IP, and then either create or have a vision to create revenue from them.
Well, as discussed in the Nielsen paper, the actual acquisitions of UFC and Formula 1 were actually as much about the ability to own and control content and then commercialise that as it was about, buying properties that are commercially viable and would return a profit. So the actual penetration that those guys have into the marketplace, and then the possibilities of further deepening that with additional content and IP ownership, is what those sales were all about. And that's what is interesting, is that you've got some really sophisticated and well-resourced ownership groups coming into these organisations that have huge market penetration. That's what's exciting and interesting. Yeah.
So how will it change sponsorship?
Look, traditionally, there's sort of a few standard mainstream broadcasters owned content and things like that, but what we're seeing now is that sponsorship, and this isn't new, rights holders and brands, they take advantage of content creation to engage fans, and the growth in that space, and especially with digital technology improving, that is being used. But how this will change sponsorship particularly is it opens it up to more than just a broadcaster or just a rights holder having control of that content, because you've got rights holders that can do it directly. Commercial partners can now jump in and actually create some of their own content that they own. And you've got, ownership groups, so, people like your IEGs and things like that have purchased sporting teams, ESP. Social channels themselves, so Facebook and that come into the IP ownership type of a conversation. Amazon, we're seeing now starting to enter some bidding processes. The athletes themselves, look at you can subscribe to watch, channels of certain athletes out there. LeBron and things like that have their own subscription-based channels.
It all seems like it's too much.
Well, I think it's just appealing to many appetites, so it's breaking it down. And so then the traditional broadcasters then are forced to collaborate with any of those above groups to be able to get cut through themselves. So it's going to change how sponsorship's done. So, IP owners controlling the content, and then that's going to change how the way sponsorship's sold. It's going to change the way sponsorship's delivered, and then ultimately how it's measured. And that'll all change, with these additional rights. So remembering, these are not just about changing how the rights are delivered. It's creating new rights as well through these channels. And then companies coming into the marketplace will have more ability and appetite to come into the marketplace because they might not be somebody that wants to be seen on television.
So those changes are clearly going to flow through to the makeup of partnerships. Your Schedule A in your contract about what you're getting and when and what channels and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
How do you see that playing out? Because it's not just the same as just saying, oh, well, now you can do stuff on Facebook Watch or you can stream on YouTube. Sign here.
Well, I mean, if we drill
or maybe it is, I don't know.
if we drill right down into, traditionally there's just been packages that have been sold which have been tailored towards certain industry segments, or people have done a bit of a estimated sort of educated guess on which best categories suit their business, which best categories suit their assets they've got. Let's put a package together and sell them. Pretty old school. Most people that are good at sponsorship are past that now.
Yep.
But
all our listeners,
if we've got the benefit of having a quite a global client base, so we see how sponsorship's done in one side of the world in the UK, sitting in Australia looking at the other side of the world in the US. Australia might be one side of the world depending where you are.
It's underneath,
and then Australia, sits sort of in a really different space. And the UK traditionally have all been about branding. It's always been front of shirt, LED,
signage,
TV rights.
Hospitality, even. Real focus on hospitality.
Well, hospitality traditionally over there is not even seen as a sponsorship asset. It's actually sold separately. So the sponsorship numbers, we're talking less than 10 sponsorship was quite normal, top flight.
No activations around grounds, particularly at football,
very
quite
little,
often.
Because they were owned by different parties, sort of like the governing bodies used to own those and things. And then you look on the other side of the world, in the US, branding was not actually, prominent on uniforms and shirts.
We're only just seeing small logos on the NBA jerseys now.
Signage was quite minimal as well. It's quite a clean stadia over there, but it's all about customer engagement, fan engagement, community engagement, the tailgate parties.
I was just going to say the parties. If you listen back to Houston Dynamo, they talk about two different bar areas at the game. One that's family orientated and fun and stuff, and one where people just want to go and have beers and blow trumpets and Yahoo and drums and things like that.
Yeah. And very different ways of looking at the ability to attract partners and then service and provide value to them. Here in Australia, we've got the best of both worlds. We're quite a large sporting landscape in terms of there isn't a definitive top sport. There's probably 6 or 7 fighting to be the number one in the marketplace.
And people quite often like multiple sports.
Yeah.
Right?
And therefore you've got, the challenge to get enough sponsors. Australia's not the biggest economy, so enough sponsors to service and provide enough funding for those sports to run. Therefore, you've got to be creative around what sponsorships you go after. So, it's not uncommon for a top flight sporting organisation in Australia to have 60 sponsors. There's only about 4 of them that are on those branding pieces. There's a lot of others then are at the community engagement levels, but then you've got the other bits around digital, and you've got other bits around actual just full-on grassroots community. So depending where you are in the world, you've got all these different makes up traditionally of how sponsorship works. Now, with the emergence of IP ownership coming back into the hands of the rights owners and the content that they're generating, it opens up opportunities for greater branding opportunities in the US sports market, greater community and fan engagement in the UK market, more commercialisation opportunities in an Australian market which is cluttered. It actually doesn't matter where you are in the world. It's going to help broaden the sponsorship portfolio of assets to be sold everywhere.
But does it diminish the value of the traditional branding pieces that are already in place?
Look, I don't think so, because I think what it is actually moving with the times to keep penetrating, because I've got a few friends that don't watch any sport at all on their TV.
Why are you friends with them? On their TV. I thought you were going to say they don't watch sport at all.
No, they
you should unfriend those people.
Yeah. Sorry, Tim. So he won't even be listening to this.
No, he won't listen to this. Hi to our Chief Technology Officer, by the way, if you are listening.
Yeah, just by mistake. People subscribing to the channels that they want to watch those certain sports through live streaming and things like that. You look at the Premier League football here in Australia. I know a guy, actually Sam in our office, subscribed to Optus for his broadband at home.
Oh, I watched the Leeds game on Saturday night.
Just so he could... Well, he subscribed to Optus for his internet at home just so he could watch the Premier League.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, he can stream that and then on his phone, and he sits in bed watching it, doesn't watch it on television. He's choosing how he wants to consume sport. That's the real sort of key to what you just mentioned there around, is it going to dilute? I actually think it'll augment the value of partnerships.
I'm catching up with Max Bailey, head of digital from Nielsen, later on today to record his part that's coming up in the show. One of the things I said I'm going to say to him is I still don't think rights holders are getting it right in this space. So, for example, I'm a Leeds United supporter, and I'm going to... marching on together, I'm going to ask him about the situation where there's a new platform rolled out by the EFL called iFollow, where you can subscribe and watch games anytime, right around the world. The problem is you have to watch them live. Now, I don't know if the FA and the EFL and all those people who live in England understand that there's different time zones, but for 38 games plus of a season, I don't want to be getting up at 2 or 3 o'clock every weekend to watch a game live. But you can't watch it on demand for 2 days.
Yeah, well...
So there's money there on the table, and it's being left on the table because they can't figure out how to give it to people when they want.
Well, I think the technology's got to catch up a little bit there. There's probably an element of that as
we can put a man on the moon, apparently.
Arguably. So that's a different conversation.
It's all done in a studio. The content, the man on the moon, apparently.
It's all, you know what? It's all content.
Yeah, exactly.
If we did that again, there'd be branding on Red Bull would sponsor...
that Felix bloke to jump out.
Yeah. No, he sponsored Neil Armstrong.
Yeah. It's comeback game.
Let's get back to business.
Okay, so how can sponsorship professionals stay ahead of the game with this? There's some key things that they can do to make sure, because this is a bit of a period where some people have been doing it for a while, some people have been doing it well. A lot of people are starting to commercialise it, and there's new platforms being rolled out, every couple of months, and streaming services and things like that. As a sponsorship professional, sitting at your desk with your boss asking what's going on, sponsors may be talking about the opportunities here. How do they stay ahead of the game?
That's an interesting dynamic you just sort of alluded to there, being sponsorship professionals talking to their bosses, because that they're right there is the challenge, right?
Talking to your boss?
Well, no. If so, obviously we're speaking to lots of people all over the place, but particularly in the UK, we talk to both our clients and those that are in the industry that aren't clients, and they've got a recently expanded portfolio of benefits and inventory that they can start to sell.
Yep.
Those at the top of the tree there, the commercial directors and whatnot, the chief revenue officers, they just want to see the cash. So how come we haven't sold our sleeve yet? How come we haven't sold both sides of the LED, the fan and pitch side facing? How come we haven't sold our geo-targeted things and got the most money for them? Because they're just looking at, oh, wow, we've got all these opportunities, we've got staff, let's go do it. And what the kind of feeling is from the actual guys at the coalface is that having that expanded portfolio of benefits and inventory comes with many challenges. Whilst it is exciting, they've got to actually stay ahead of the curve in terms of what those trends are, why they're there, what they're worth, and then actually hit the marketplace prepared, not just actually go throwing into it.
Well, and the challenge is you can understand all of that, but if you're on the bleeding edge of some of that stuff, it's still hard to execute it well. You're going to make mistakes. It might piss off your fan base and stuff like that.
And then this sort of space in its own is even more challenging because it is so new. Ownership of your own IP, the generation of content to sell. What's that worth? How many of it? What's the quantity of your inventory that you should allow for that? It literally could be unlimited if you just took your, put the foot down and went for it. You could sell unlimited amounts of it, but you're going to lose the cut through. So what's the balance? And so, that's why people like Nielsen are fully authorised to write these sorts of papers because they actually go deep into that analysis of what it is worth and why it's worth this, and where could the tipping point be, that sort of thing. And so, the top 3 things I would say for any sponsorship professional to take advantage of this trend and new ones is be prepared. And I don't mean just be
like
ready.
A Boy Scout.
No, I don't mean be ready. I don't mean be like, cool, we know this is coming. And
you ready? Yes.
Yeah. we know this is coming. We're going to hit the market on the 1st of January.
What do you mean then?
So, I mean, you got to have systems within your business to cope with it. You've got to have tools at your disposal to be able to effectively sell across many channels that give you the right data to call upon so that you can fully maximize the commercial opportunities. You have to have strategies in place and systems to manage the process from end to end. So both in your pitch process, but also how you then deliver those to your partners. So actually, selling is probably the easiest bit. Then making sure you sell that again when it's a new asset, that's the challenge because you've got to show value straight away.
All right, so I'm prepared. I've got my systems in place. I understand the data. I've got what I need.
I'd say then evolve how you sell. So the introduction of a new asset portfolio, opens up opportunities away from your traditional sponsorship objectives and traditional target markets of who you'd sell to.
Particularly geographically.
Well, it opens the door for things like challenger brands to enter the place where they might not otherwise been able to afford to, because they can run campaigns through you. You become almost like the ability, if you really wanted to go down that path, is like an advertising marketplace for shorter periods of time. And so, evolve your selling, know what your objectives are that align to that IP. So what objectives can you deliver to brands that align to that IP? And then open your eyes to go, well, those sets of objectives are really appealing to this industry sector, which we've never spoken to. Let's evolve our selling process to get there.
So I'm prepared. I've evolved my selling process.
Yep.
I make some sales, hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, I've done well. Boss pat me on the back.
If you don't make sales, we can't get on to number 3.
Okay. Well, let's assume I've made 20 new sales this month.
Yeah.
Well done, me.
So
what's next?
You need to measure.
Yes.
You need to measure.
Yes.
And you need to measure.
Okay. So I'm measuring.
Yeah. So the opportunity to own and deliver your own content is going to give you great data. You're going to give you great insights, great connectivity with your fan base and your engaged audience. It actually has the opportunity to allow you to move, for brand and rights holder side, to move from borrowing an audience to owning an audience.
Absolutely.
Which is a huge, when you're talking marketing and actual the ability to turn that into revenue, massive differentiator.
Yeah.
So, the data that comes along those will create easier measurement tools than traditional. So, you're not just looking at eyeballs and then value and comparative spends and things like that. You actually if you've got the right systems and tools in place, you can actually measure the commercial impact of those.
Oh, you can measure, right down to click-throughs from an ad in a video.
Yeah, and so as a sponsorship professional, you need all that data to deliver value to your partner, but also then to sell going into the future. Because when you enter a new space like this, you're probably your first couple of transactions are not going to be what your ideal sales price is going to be, right? So apart from measuring the data and insights and the trends, you can use those assets to be flexible and to provide a continual value, and then increase spends as you go on.
And measuring well with that data, particularly in digital channels. And if we just talk streaming and things like that, the data that you can collect around average viewing times, unique watches, how many times people have clicked through, how that goes through to your shop. So you might use it to sell, deodorant if that's your deodorant partner. And is that for people who don't necessarily have a deep understanding in this space? So if you think back, maybe 10 years ago with social media, it was something that people went, we think that's going to be good, but we don't really understand how it works, and we'll just see how we go. So measuring, and showing people the hard data, which is easy to collect in this space, in the digital space, is going to help you get some sales over the line or retain sponsors and upsell them, because people understand data, but if they don't stream on a phone in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning on the other side of the world, they don't necessarily get it and understand it. So and if it's not broken, if their sponsorships are working okay, they're like, why change? So the data helps build that whole story around it.
But it gives you the opportunity to actually sell to those reactive and proactive people, because you can go back and forth with data. But, that's what number 2 is about, evolve your selling. And I'd say the biggest sort of comparative to this type of, movement in the industry is LED. Remember when LED first came on the market 9 or 10 years ago, and it was all these opportunities and possibilities about what can be done, but wow, it's expensive.
Yeah,
the return is huge.
Yeah,
it was actually, it's a no-brainer nowadays. Yeah.
So where do you think this is all heading?
Look, I think that the ability to control conversations is going to have huge impacts commercially. But I actually have a pretty specific thought where I think the growing trend of TV deals, TV rights deals, is probably going to be the casualty of all this in terms of the main source of revenue for rights owners. We're already seeing those sorts of conversations in, the AFL in Australia and cricket and the rugby league, where they kind of know that they're, the glory days of 20% growth year on year on their TV deals is probably, or even more, is kind of coming to an end. So I think the broadcasters collaborating directly with rights owners and brands and things like that is probably something that will start to emerge. And then the use of sort of technology to create content in partnership between broadcasters and the rights owners is probably the next sort of revenue stream. And you look at things like data, and I was reading something the other day about the GPS analytics of the athletes that run around, wearing the sort of tracking devices.
The bras.
Yeah, the man bras. And so there's a rights holder who's fighting for the right to own that data. And the reason being is that they can then sell it to the broadcaster.
Well, you can use it in analysis and all sorts of stuff.
Well, then the broadcaster can create live content.
Well, we saw that with State of Origin here in Australia with GPS trackers and the commentators actually talking about it in the broadcast and analysing it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's probably that generation of content for the broadcasters by the rights owners to create a more engaging product.
Well, I see opportunities as you're talking there. If you've got that content and you talk about, aspiring young athletes, you can turn that data into benchmarking data. And if you want to be like Coutinho or Messi or, I don't know, Luke Hodge, then you can have a look at that data and say, this is how I'm tracking. This person makes, and actually have it on your phone and have it customized. And then, you can bring in partners around nutrition and fitness and build training programs and back that onto your academy and all sorts of stuff. Like, it's a wormhole, that data.
No, exactly right. And we're seeing that, even the predictive analysis there during the Tour de France, we saw the commentators predicting who was going to make a break and when with amazing accuracy.
I could never stay awake long enough. I watch about 15 minutes and then I find myself I'm asleep. I love it.
That's all off the data. That's all off the historical data of that athlete, the GPS tracking that they're wearing, the tactics of the team, and
the course profile, all that sort of stuff.
And then they predict, okay, we think in the next sort of couple of minutes this guy should make a break for it, and then you know what? 95% of the time it happened.
Yeah, watch out when the gambling gets involved. Who's going to make
gambling
the next
already
break?
Use that predictive stuff.
No,
it's just not as accurate.
Yeah, I need to get my hands on that.
Yeah. So,
right.
But I thought Luke Hodge was only so great because of Light and Easy.
There's that. Well, there's a sponsorship opportunity. So if you want to read the full version of that blog, just head along to SponServe.net, head to the resources and then the blog section, and it's all there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Max Barnett, Global Head of Digital at Nielsen Sports, is a creator and connector. Through his career, he has excelled at identifying clients' objectives and then building digital services and products to achieve those objectives. Max is comfortable connecting digital with core business functions and stakeholders, and he has a strong track record in developing relationships and teams in this area, and from a diverse range of industry as well, from sports and entertainment right through to pharmaceuticals. Most recently, he has built Nielsen's digital function from scratch. He's responsible for new product development, most notably their social media valuation product, which interestingly delivered 80+ valuations in under a year, along with a number of other services that are helping global rights holders maximise their commercial success. And his team work with both commercial and marketing communication sides of both rights holders and brands. Now, Max is regarded as an industry expert in digital return on investment, and that's because he has a strong understanding of how digital can positively impact rights holders' revenue streams from sponsorship right through to ticketing. His data and team's recommendations have then been at the heart of a number of high-profile sponsorship deals over the last 18 months. Here's Max to discuss the trend of IP owners taking control of content and conversations. Max Barnett, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm excellent. We always kick off the show with a few easy icebreaker questions for the guests, just to get the juices flowing, help the audience get to know you a little bit better. Nothing too serious. First question is, apart from the obvious answers of family members, pets, laptops, and a mobile phone, if your house was on fire, what's the first thing you're going to make sure you grab on your way out?
Am I allowed to say photos? I know that's an obvious one, but
you can say photos.
Yeah. But photos of family holidays, family events, that sort of thing.
Very good. A second icebreaker question is, what was your first ever job?
My first ever job was, I must have been 13, 14, and over the summer holidays, I lay patios. So, I worked with a building company laying patios. Very
good. That sounds like hard work.
Yeah, it was. No, it's really good for rugby training, actually, hauling around slabs of concrete and that sort of thing. And I remember the guy I worked with said, it's not what you earn, it's what you learn. So I'm not sure. I haven't yet laid another patio.
Well, from laying patios to now being the global head of digital at Nielsen Sports is a fair journey. What's that been like? What's been your progression into your current role?
I'd say it certainly hasn't been linear. I started my career in Asia. So straight out of university, I spent 2 years on something called the JET program, which is the Japanese Ministry of Education's cultural exchange program. So you teach English and learn Japanese. So I did that for a couple of years, and then shortly after moved to Shanghai, where I worked in market research, recruitment, actually working for Nielsen. Nielsen was one of my clients. And then decided it was best I came back to London and started my career proper with Accenture, the management consulting company, and then 4 or 5 years later, after that, I joined Replicom. Replicom were acquired by Nielsen, and that's where I am now.
And you're there now as the global head of digital for Nielsen Sports. Tell us a little bit about that job.
Yeah, so before I joined Replicom, I think we were still figuring out exactly what our role was going to be in the digital revolution. So my role continues to be I wear a couple of hats. So the first one is product leadership. So that's defining product strategy and going out and building products for our clients. So most notably recently, we've built we're just launching very, very soon actually an online portal that surfaces kind of Basecamp, but it surfaces media valuation, including digital and social media valuation data. The other hat I wear is more of a consulting hat, so face to face with our global client base, kind of working through with our clients how they use our data, both valuation, but also social media listening to ensure basically acquire, engage, and monetize a fan base. So a couple of roles, both product and kind of consulting and client servicing.
Sounds busy, so we appreciate your time, and we invited you on the show as our next Nielsen guest in our series to talk about one of the trends from Nielsen's Commercial Trends in Sports 2017, and that trend is IP owners taking control of content and the conversation. Max, why would a rights holder want to own content production, particularly when you look at live broadcasts? Surely it's just easier to take a big fat check with lots of zeros on it from the broadcast deal and let someone else make the content and get it out to people.
Yeah, I suppose it really depends what your sponsors want and what your target sponsors want. Certainly, the sponsors who are looking for more exposure and eyeballs on logos may well actually work with a broadcaster or a technology platform who can offer the largest number of eyeballs, which then they can kind of convert into a media value. But increasingly, sponsors are becoming more sophisticated, and what they're really looking for is is a much deeper, richer understanding of who those people are. They will likely sacrifice, cumulative numbers across multiple platforms for actually a much more clear view of who those fans are on those platforms. So therefore, for a rights holder, you will see increasingly they're investing in their own production of content because, number one, they own the data, and number two, they can employ strategies that harvest as much data as possible, which they can then use, either to engage and offer more one-to-one content experience, or understanding far more about who that fan and therefore consumer is for their sponsors.
You talk about platforms and channels, and the platforms available and the content being produced has just exploded in recent times. Every month there's an announcement of a new service, and last week it was Facebook Watch, and I read recently that Disney's going to pull their movies off Netflix because they want to launch their own streaming service. The market is getting more and more fragmented, and while it's easier for brands to be creating content, it is, I think, becoming harder for consumers to easily consume it because there's just so many platforms. Do you see the market consolidating channels eventually, or is this just what it's going to be like from now on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it points towards the role the rights holder plays here as a content aggregator. You're right, content is exploding, it's exploding across different platforms, but that is where potentially the rights holders, the teams, the leagues can aggregate that and make that more of a seamless experience. Content may live on lots of different platforms, but the rights holder can do that. And I think sport's quite unique in that respect because if you look at, similar challenges in music sits on lots of different platforms as well. But, it's not like you can follow one artist and one artist only and get all of your music and content through that. But in sports, you can, and increasingly you'll see the more sophisticated rights holders use their website and their app to harvest all of that or collect all of that content, or provide links out to content broadcasters and other people hosting that content.
Who would you say is already creating and distributing content well, and why is that?
So I think looking at, without going in, I think when you talk about especially digital and social, so what kind of fits under the umbrella I'm responsible for, you can often get, I think, a bit distracted by content, i.e., when people describe something as a cool piece of content, a viral piece of content. I think that can be distracting because what I think often what we look at is, if I go back to my point earlier in terms of data collection, I think people who are creating and distributing content well are those that are capturing content every touch point. So therefore, I'd look at the major leagues and teams who are either investing or collaborating with the likes of Microsoft, SAP, because they have underlying technology that have been used for 10, 15 years by brands in terms of how they collect information on their customers and provide bespoke offers or bespoke content to those customers. So therefore, as I said, it points towards the big leagues and the teams who are clearly working with those types of organisations. So if you look at, for example, Real Madrid and the work that they're already doing with Microsoft, I know it's an obvious one. It's pretty obvious, pointing towards one of the biggest clubs in the world on social. But it will be interesting to see what's the impact, what's the type of experience that Microsoft can offer off the back of that data collection.
On the flip side, what mistakes have you seen rights holders make so far on the content production front?
So I think that some of the biggest mistakes that I think we're seeing, and people are dipping their toe into the water. I think we're very early on in this journey in terms of content producers or IP owners bringing that content back in-house. But I think caution is probably the biggest mistake I've seen so far, especially as it applies to social content. I think if you look at the type of fan who is, spends more time on their smartphone and more time on digital and social than they do in front of the TV, that points towards the type of content that they want to see and they want to enjoy. So it's all around authenticity. So I think there are a handful maybe of clubs, of leagues that are really doing this well. I think you can still see it every day from a lot of rights holders and out there that they're producing quite clean, quite corporate communication, and that's just not going to excite a fan base that's predominantly on their smartphone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. It's a very an interesting point about the hesitation. Max, different channels will offer different types of content, obviously, and that impacts the value it can deliver an audience. Which platforms do you see as offering the most value to rights holders, and how does a right holder know what channels they should actually be focusing on? Because there is a lot and they've got limited resources sometimes, well, a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. We launched last season our syndicated social media evaluation product called Social 24. And through that gives us a really clear picture in terms of what the most valuable social media platform is. And by value, I mean in this sense, the media equivalency value that they can report back to brands. And we see Facebook as head and shoulders above the rest in terms of driving both impressions, but also critically engagement. So we're seeing typically clubs who are part of this syndicated product drive 60-70% of their media value through Facebook. And I think that's number one. It's the reach Facebook has as a platform. It's whopping. Who's not on Facebook, but it's also the way that Facebook continues to evolve its product and the tools that they can therefore offer to content publishers on that platform. Interestingly, though, if you look away from social, so when we compare social versus web and app, it's there when you see large rights holders who have content and games like the fantasy games. That makes a really interesting holds a really interesting sway in terms of share of value. So if you look at the types of value being driven through fantasy apps, it's whopping, because that's a sticky product, and it's a product fans will continue going back to, and therefore drive engagement and impressions, and therefore media value.
Well, talking about the media value, and I mentioned big fat checks before from broadcast deals, how does the changing ownership and content generation impact those large-scale broadcast deals, and how will this then flow on and impact on athlete contract values?
That's a great question, because what we'll be doing, so as an independent kind of company in the industry, what we'll be doing is sourcing data from lots of different touch points and aggregating that into a media value that sits across TV, print, web, app, and social. And some of those channels teams can control, some of those can't. So what increasingly clubs are doing is identifying, or leagues are identifying, what assets can I bring in-house and therefore control and drive value. So interestingly, if you look at organizations like the NFL, looking at lots of different new content streams that can potentially reach new audiences, like Hard Knocks, or their collaboration with Amazon called All or Nothing. So they're looking at owning and building new assets, but also you'd see rights holders and teams look at, to your point, players. So what can the players, what kind of reach can the players offer? What type of engagement can the players offer, the athletes offer? And therefore, how can contracts be structured to include that value. But what I'd say is that certainly in football, we're only just beginning to see that, and you can see, with the recent court cases in Spain with Messi and Ronaldo, the industry and the tax laws are struggling or still figuring out exactly where the media value and the value in as a whole lies. If that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, and I think it's one that'll, that answer will become a little bit clearer over the next few years as that sort of stuff starts to play out.
Definitely. But what I'd say is,
go on.
What I'd say is you really got to follow where the sponsors are looking. So if you look at the increasing roster that brands are looking to bring on in terms of influencers and ambassadors, and how to leverage and how brands are using those influencers and ambassadors' social media followers. So if you look at the way that, for example, Nike and Adidas use their roster, there's clear value, and brands are very, very attracted by that. So if you follow that kind of logic of, brands are looking there, that means that rights holders should definitely be looking at the types of agreements that they should be having with their roster, and the types of assets that they should be carving out in digital and social, but also kind of offline as well.
Very interesting. Many in the marketing and content space, and so not traditionally particularly if we talk about sports and rights holders specifically, but many in the marketing and the content space for some time now have, we're talking 5, maybe 8 years, have spruiked that brands, and in this context I mean rights holders, not those brands who are sponsoring, that they should see themselves as publishers, and that means creating content. And a few of those reasons you spoke about before are that they can take control of the message, and it builds long-term trust around a brand and engagement with that brand. But for me, none of that really matters unless it ultimately leverages into more income somewhere down the line eventually. Is the play with creating your own content to mostly focus on just the subscription income alone? Is it 2, selling ads and sponsorship around that content? Or is it 3, focusing on the subscription income and building an audience to then leverage that and recover costs, and then, progress that audience into selling other things like jerseys or hospitality suites and things like that? Where's the play for the income here?
I think it's both. Rights holders and teams will be looking at both of those key revenue streams that you mentioned. So ideally subscription, but that's a real challenge, because then you're looking at a certain type of fan and a certain segment of that fan base, and looking at their sort of tolerance to paying for content, and what content, and then how do you deliver those different kind of content categories. So it's certainly possible, but it's not easy. And we've mentioned it a few times. That relies on a huge amount of data around who those fans are. People say data's the new oil. Kind of in our industry, I think there's plenty of data, but I don't think people quite know. Or we're only just beginning to understand what to do with that oil.
Yeah, well, we can build on that analogy and say we need to learn how to refine the oil.
Refine. Let alone find where the kind of car is. You know what I mean? So I think in terms of that subscription model, that'll work. Like I said, for a very loyal fan base. So if you look at in Japan, for example, a huge amount of clubs' revenue in Japan is through membership and subscription. So they have loyal fan bases there. So I'm sure opportunities to monetize that loyalty and that existing pay scheme, may continue. I think where you'll see major rights holders and leagues justify further investment in growing a production team or investing in a piece of technology is when they can start seeing revenue directly attributed to content creation. So, for example, the concept that we consult on a lot at Nielsen Sports globally is identification of content themes. So, you mentioned earlier the content being produced is exploding. But if you can categorize that content into, for example, training content or behind the scenes content or fan related content, you can start publishing and posting that content across multiple platforms. But you can also start linking a sponsor to that type of category, what we call a fan story, and therefore, drive direct revenue from those content themes.
So when they are producing, they're categorising that content, they're producing that content, we think that they're doing it in-house, but should rights holders be really concentrating on building fully skilled in-house teams and truly owning that content production, or should they really be, maybe building the bare minimum in terms of skills and team size, and then partnering with others who potentially have much more skill and equipment to bring to the table, and partner with those others to actually bring that content to fulfillment? Should they go in-house or out-house, or maybe in between?
Yeah, I think there are some. First up, there are some incredible agencies out there who do that kind of second part you mentioned incredibly well, and service primarily quite a lot of events. So not all year round. So all year round events, have a clearer justification or a more obvious justification of investing in production capability. But smaller events that run for a month a year or 2 weeks a year. If you think about the tennis tournaments, then that may be a kind of an obvious starting point for them to think about how they go about producing better content. I think the clubs and leagues that are investing most in those in-house production capabilities, and that you look at, I suppose, in where you're from, Australia, you look at the investment AFL have made in terms of the content that they can produce in-house. I think that investment is enabled because there's an overarching monetization strategy there. They're not, and also the opportunity to engage a fan base more and more, but also engage new fan bases as well through different types of content that a big production team can produce.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation there with the AFL. They've been on that train for a long time, and if we were to contrast that with, say, football in the UK, the AFL are leading the way on producing the program that covers all of the games for the entire weekend, so it's not left up to the clubs like it is in the UK. They partner with a sponsor in Telstra, which is the biggest phone carrier in the country, and you can watch through the AFL app, so it's not fragmented through the clubs with their own streaming services. You can watch games live through the AFL app without using your data if you're a Telstra customer. So I think that, they've got a much more tightly confined space in Australia with that type of sport, so they're very lucky. Yeah. So look, getting a little bit down into the weeds just for one question, and then we'll come back up. If a rights holder is, they've got small budget, small team, it's a bit sort of, we've got to do this sort of stuff in-house and give it our best shot. iPhones are pretty good these days, but professional equipment, obviously, like lighting and HD cameras, etc., takes it to a complete different level. Yeah. If we take video for an example, how are those people who are in-house and creating their own video content, how do you see them capturing it?
I would say, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's all around, if you're delivering content predominantly for your smartphone, and let's make, therefore, the assumption that demographic who are consuming that content are a certain age, then I think there are opportunities to invest far less in sort of professional equipment and actually go iPhone first. Number one, iPhone first is still pretty good quality. Yeah. But also, it does give it that, secondly, it sort of does give it that authentic feel, especially if you are looking to produce content like behind the scenes, at the training ground, that type of content. Sure, it can be produced through the iPhone. On that point, I'd say you'd want to go sort of resource people as opposed to technology first. Yeah. I think you'd be wanting to go out and capturing as much content as possible on the iPhone to then use it later that day. But likewise, cameras are pretty much running the whole time in big clubs and leagues, whether that's through someone's iPhone or just a camera that's set up capturing training content throughout. For the reason that you can produce it and send it out that afternoon, or there are so many content themes that you could in all likelihood post that 2 years later. So it's all about capturing as much content as possible.
Yeah.
I suppose when you're down at the training ground, for example.
Yeah, absolutely, and then sift through it later. Do you think the trend of taking control of content production will mean rights holders and brands will actually co-produce content more, or do you think it will still fall more to the rights holder to be producing all that content? You're talking about cameras having running pretty much the whole time at a club, and then building an audience and engagement with that audience, and then the brand coming in and piggybacking on that with traditional ads and branding in and around the content, or is there another option?
I think that's the ideal. If you look at the league, certainly where I'm based in London, but this is as true in London as it is, in the NBA as well. What I think leading clubs are doing is identifying those content themes first and capturing those and producing them in an authentic way, and then looking to collaborate with rights holders around that content. Because if brands, if sponsors just want ads that look to sell their tires or their computer software, then they can walk down the street, and I'm sure there are plenty of ad sales guys at Facebook that would be willing to give them a bespoke, targeted ads, for fairly decent rates. So what is it about the content that the rights holder is producing? Is it exclusivity? Is it timeliness? Is it the premium, the premium nature of the content that really offers the sponsor something genuinely different to a standard advert?
We spoke before about athletes and we touched on their ability to be broadcasters and even have control of their channels and create their own content. One view is that at the moment, those athletes who are successful on that front, that's only possible at this kind of a sweet spot in time, because those athletes are successful in this space and have a profile which they leverage. But that's actually been grown from traditional channels which had a lot of eyeballs. Do you think future athletes will find it harder to actually build their own audiences in this sea of channels and content all competing for our attention globally?
With athletes, it's about knowing what your fans like. Clubs do not have rights to players' content that they shoot from home or that type of content. It's a content that fans increasingly like. So for athletes, it's about knowing what content you can produce that's differentiated from traditional club content, and then if you've got the agents, if you've got the team behind you, producing that type of content that will continue to remain relevant and commercially valuable moving forward.
This one's isn't so much a question, but a little bit of an outline of a situation, and it's a touch long. I'm going to explain it, but I'm going to give you free rein to respond at the end. So maybe you might offer some advice. Maybe you'll sympathise. It's up to you. So I'm a Leeds United supporter, marching on together, but I live on the other side of the world.
For you.
Yeah, we all have our cross to bear. I've been known to pay an extra $15 a month for additional pay TV channels through Foxtel in Australia, so that when Leeds actually do play a televised game, I can watch it. But the thing is, I would often record the game and get up early on the weekend and watch it without checking the score. So I'd turn my phone completely off so that I can actually enjoy the game. Well, if we won anyway, because losing's never very enjoyable. But now those channels in Australia, so beIN Sports on Foxtel, they haven't got their end sorted out, and there is no deal at the moment to show the championship games that are televised by Sky to piggyback into Australia, despite them actually striking deals in other countries. So not all is lost. The EFL this season has launched iFollow, which is billed as a platform for global fans, right? So that sounds perfect. I'm super excited. Well, it would be if Leeds have actually were one of the clubs that signed onto that platform, but instead they've gone down the owned content path, but they're only allowed to show the games that aren't chosen to be shown on Sky. Now, remember that now means I can't see those Sky televised games in Australia because there is no deal struck with BN Sports through Foxtel to bring those to Australia, right? So the non-televised games are streamed live through the Leeds TV platform, but the problem is so many people are complaining online that the streams don't work, they can't log in, they crash, it's not proper HD. And further, the global fan, like me, I want to watch that game on a little bit of a delay, not at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. because, 46 games or so through every Saturday or weekend in a row is pretty tough for an old bloke like me to handle, right? So the games are available in full later on, but it's 2 days later, so it's hardly worth it. I can't avoid the result and actually enjoy the game. Now, the reality is that I'm a fan I think this is a really important point for a lot of people to consider, that I am a fan who is willing to spend money, at least $5 a week or so, to watch that content on demand, good quality, when I want. Yet no one can actually figure out how to deliver it and take my money off me. And I don't think it is as simple in today's global economy and when you have such a widely distributed fan base like football teams do, to simply stream live games and think you're doing a good job. What do you make of all that?
So am I right in saying the major criticism you have of iFollow is the fact that it only shows leads aren't subscribed, right?
Correct.
So so they can't join. But what do you think if you weren't a Leeds fan and you were another Championship fan? Would that product suit you down to the ground then? It's on demand.
It would if it was on demand, like I could replay that game, 3 hours later. Absolutely, It would be. I'd be willing to get up in the middle of the night to start the game and pause it and come back. Yeah. You can't do that through Leeds TV. If you pause it and then press start again, it just picks up at the point where you push play, so it just skips 5 minutes ahead if you duck off to the toilet or something.
Yeah, and there's the challenge, right? Because you either go as a group, and that enables you to invest in a great piece of technology like iFollow and continually evolve the product, i.e., offering it on demand later, or you go with the Leeds TV platform, which then enables you to try and build the product you think the majority of your fans need. But as you pointed to some of the problems, those pieces of technology are incredibly difficult and expensive to maintain, and you need a support staff to keep them up and running. Right? Otherwise, that trust is lost, and that willing fan base, that loyal fan base like yourself, are going to turn off and go elsewhere. What we haven't talked about also is illegal streaming as well, and that content sits elsewhere and that can be consumed the whole time as well. So I think, ideally, what you want is an iFollow type product, right? But that everyone subscribes to, that enables on-demand watching in all markets, and that is way easier said than done, and that requires everybody to act as a group and not individuals. But all of this will come down to, well, how much will, I suppose, Leeds have to contribute, or how much will Leeds get out of that? What are the follower sizes? And also, I'm sure there are also concerns not only about pirating, but I suppose there'll be concerns about whether that will cannibalise existing broadcast deals and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's incredibly complicated.
For all my whinging, Max, I'm still going to get up at 4:45 a.m. tomorrow morning and pay my $8 Australian. I'm going to watch the game. So
You're a lot. Well, I hope it works.
No, it worked. It worked on the week. It worked on the weekend. So fingers crossed. There was a couple of glitches from time to time, but by and large, it was okay. Max, great chat. Very insightful into what is both an exciting and but still a pretty uncertain environment around the world. If people want to get in contact with you, what can they do?
LinkedIn is great for me, or Twitter. So Max Barnett, I'm sure your details, maybe we can drop in the podcast details.
Yep, sounds good. Max Barnett, Global Head of Digital, Nielsen Sports. Thank you so much for taking us inside the trend of IP owners taking control of content and the conversations.
Excellent, Dan. Thanks very much for having me.
Awesome chat with Max, and off air as we finished, he mentioned to me that he thought that the interview maybe went a little bit quick, and initially I felt the same, but looking at the timing, it was pretty much bang on. So I think it just comes down to just how big an area this is and just how many opportunities and subsequent challenges there are for both rights holders and brands to get it right. So I think it's probably one of those interviews where you can go back and listen to it again and get great value from it. I know Max has been travelling a bit lately and playing catch-up in the office, so a big thank you for fitting us in and sharing with the listeners. Don't forget to head to SponServe.net to read Mark's blog, and of course, if you aren't getting the blogs or the podcast direct to your inbox each and every week, then shoot me an email or sign up at SponServe.net and we'll sort that out for you. Also in the show notes for this episode is a link to Nielsen's Commercial Trends in Sport 2017. If you haven't read it yet, then do yourself a favour and get to it. Also, if you haven't already, do us a massive favour and head to iTunes and leave us a review. Reviews help others just like you in the industry find the podcast and learn from others. So it is really important, and we hope you can help. If you want to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. Just search for Daniel Oyston or drop me an email at daniel@sponserve.net. And of course, you can connect with Mark on LinkedIn or email at mark@sponserve.net. And don't forget that you can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, I'm Daniel Oyston. Thanks for listening to Inside Sponsorship.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, blogs and resources, head to SponServe.net or search for SponServe on Facebook, Twitter or LinkedIn.